Greetings and welcome to the Act React podcast. I'm Daniel Burkholder, a dance artist based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk, Menominee, and Potawatomi peoples. And I'm the host of this podcast. This is kind of a fun episode to finish our 2025 season. As in this episode, I had kind of the tables turned on me with my former student and research assistant, Megan Holzhauer. She will be leading the conversation with me. Megan assisted me last spring doing research on all the artists we invited to join the podcast, as well as working on some of the transcripts and coding them for research use. But there'll be more about that at a later date. But for now, you get to enjoy my conversation with Megan, who you'll see as a thoughtful and deeply engaged artist who really was a joy to work with in the spring. She really made my job as host of this podcast so much easier this past year. In addition, she is an outstanding dancer and performer, academic, and certainly an emerging and insightful choreographer. Her senior choreographic work was chosen at our American College Dance Association Regional Conference to be one of the two dances to represent our region at the National Convention in Washington, D.C. in April. And it was really a lot of fun. I got to go with her and their dancers, and we got to go to DC, and they got to perform and take classes. And as some of you may know, I lived in Washington, D.C. for 20 years, so I got to show them around a little bit, and I also got to see a lot of friends. So it was really great. Yeah, so Megan leads the conversation, and she talks to me, asks me about my experience with improvisation. Megan was also in a piece of mine where we did a lot of improv, so she has that bringing it to the table. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this final episode for 2025 of Act React. Let's get started.
Okay, hello. My name is Megan Holzhauer, and I am a recent graduate of UW-Milwaukee with a BFA in dance and also a Pilates certification. And by recent, I mean as of like a few weeks ago. So pretty recent. But this past semester, I got to work with Daniel, kind of assisting him with this podcast. And so we thought that it would be a lovely way to round off our work together by me interviewing Daniel. So we're turning the tables here a little bit. And now Daniel's in the hot seat. So how do you feel about that?
I'm excited. I think it's going to be interesting to have your perspective to ask me questions.
Yeah, for sure.
We worked together, in the last year, we worked together quite a bit because, you were in a piece of mine and on this project and in a couple other ways, ACDA and all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious to see what you'll ask.
Yeah, I've never done anything like this before, but I have watched a vast majority of the podcast, so I feel like I'm prepared in a sense. So we'll start. I'll start in a place where you usually start. And how does improvisation show up in your life?
I should have been prepared for this question. I think in a couple ways, obviously artistically, it's part of my practice. And, whether it's myself as a performer or myself as a creator, making work that's embedded with improvisation in different ways, from more structured improvisation to more open improvisation. But I also feel like, I think as many people say, like thinking about the day-to-dayness of life and trying to stay with that spontaneity on some level, especially in my current role at UWM as chair. Like I have lots of meetings and agendas and things, to-do lists and stuff like that, but still trying to not get bogged down in just getting the stuff done, but being open to the opportunities that arise, and not get too blind, too tight with the blinders. So I'd like to think that is a way that it shows up in my daily life.
Yeah, for sure. Just digging into that a little bit deeper, and I'm curious, you brought up that spontaneity, but how does that improvisational impulse that you have align with structure also? How do you find that improv and structure relate to each other in your practice? Like either one comes from another or they're constantly shifting. Like how do you go about structure with your improv?
So I'll think about that in two different ways because I kind of answered your first question in two different artistically, right? Like thinking about the way when I'm performing or I'm making a piece or teaching, like when I'm teaching improvisation, I just this semester, just the spring semester, I just got done teaching improvisation to mostly the freshman students with some dance minors in there. So a lot of theater folk who are dance minors as well. And one of the things that they mentioned a lot is that coming into the class, they were really nervous because they thought it would just be me telling them to like go and improvise. And
Mhm.
they were surprised and I think relieved about how much structure that I offered, like doing very specific exercises about space or focus or time or like, so it wasn't just do whatever you want, but like, how can you explore these parameters? And I think that is kind of how I think about improvisation as almost like as a research methodology of like thinking about certain elements or aspects and then using improvisation within that time frame or within that framework to then come up with some new information or new possibilities within that. So I think without structure, improvisation can kind of get meandering, but with structure, it gives it focus. At the same time, I think when you're in a structure, like how not to let the structure limit you at the same, you right? Like not to
Mhm.
be confined by the structure, or the framework. And I often talk about like a structure is not being a box that you're like contained within, but it's a doorway to new possibilities. And I think that is, and I think that even shows up within my work, my admin work. Like I have all these boxes and all these structures that I have to negotiate, but I'm always kind of thinking about how to reimagine them. And I think fundamentally improvisation, or really I should say, every creative act is an act of improvisation,
Yeah.
right? Because you're taking all these different elements and you're combining it to hopefully be something that is, if not totally unique or new, but not what's expected. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I think in both artistic work and the other work that I do, understanding that relationship is really important, um, to kind of be in that process of discovery.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation about like having your boxes or like your tricks in your suitcase that you can always pull out. So yeah, I definitely understand that
Yeah.
for sure. Um you talked about this a little bit already, but I was in a piece of yours for winter dances this past winter. And the process of the piece was very improv based, and we would start like rehearsals with like about like 30 minutes to an hour of improv, which was a great way to get the heart pumping and really get your head into that space that you needed to be in. But how do you drive improv, and like how do you drive what you're looking for students in improv? How do you push it to be its best version of of itself as you're working with like diverse students, like you said, working with like people who aren't necessarily as experienced, but they still deserve a place in the dance world? How do you go about that in training?
That's a really interesting question. And I'm thinking about the class that I just taught in the spring, right? Because that is an interesting population because it is a class that's required for freshman majors.
Yeah.
So all of the freshmen are in there. And then it's also required for the dance minors. And so then you get this really diverse group of students. And it could be some people that have lots of experience of dance. They may not be a dance major, but they've studied dance for many, many years. To, again, as I mentioned, a lot of theater majors and musical theater majors are majors. So they're in there. So they have a really different lens to think about performance. And then you have people who maybe have very little dance experience, and aren't a dance major but really want to explore dance, so they're a dance minor. And so you have this huge range of experience, in terms of dance training, and also experience in terms of performance and collaboration and all that kind of stuff. And what I always love about teaching that class is it does feel like it almost like levels the playing field, because it's not about how quickly you can learn material, how familiar you are with certain vocabulary, movement vocabulary. It's not about the impressive, like, physical tricks you can do, or anything like that. It's about kind of using this movement frame, the improvisation, as source to generate movement that is uniquely yours.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the people with less experience are actually better at that quicker than those with lots of training.
Yeah.
Right? Like a number of the dancers mentioned, like when they always thought of improvisation, it was always like they were doing like a 90-second improv and just do every possible trick that they can,
Yeah, show their highest kick,
and
whatever.
do the multiple turns, a big the leap, and whatever
Yeah.
else. And of course, the class kind of undercuts that. Um, and so I think the idea of not being about getting to the right answer or like the right movements really quick, but staying within the question of the improv and thinking of it as a lab. Like this is like lab work we're doing. Like thinking about even, I don't know, something like space and kinesphere, like closed kinesphere, middle kinesphere, and big kinesphere. Like how do you move in these different size bubbles? And there's no right or wrong to that. It's just being more conscious and aware of the choices you're making. And so I think like seeing people be able to kind of process that, is always really inspiring, actually. And seeing them like let go of certain ideas and then finding new ideas is really fascinating. Um, Now, in the context of like making the piece, it's a slightly different process, right? Because we are moving towards a performance, and n- the roles within the piece are going to be different for each person. And so, and still having different levels of experience with improvisation and with dance, actually, that becomes a different kind of challenge, because I want everyone on stage to kind of look their best and kind of feel their best with the performance. And but that doesn't mean everyone always gets to do everything,
Hmm.
right? Because some people have different levels of experience and different talents and different strengths and all that kind of stuff. And so when you're making a piece on students, you're always trying to assess that. And you want everyone to feel like they have a significant role. You don't want to feel like, someone feels like, oh, never got a solo, or I never got like highlighted in any way, and someone else got like all the highlights. At the same time, you've got to balance making a good piece of art.
Hmm.
That's definitely a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. I really like what you said about I don't know, because a lot of times for dancers, improv, it's not necessarily brought up to us like from beginning. Like we're kind of like, this is the structure of ballet. You do pliés, tendus, you go across the floor. Like it's very structured. So I like that what you said about you're not necessarily searching for the right answer, but you're looking for the new questions within it. So I really appreciate that mindset. But getting into a little bit more of that, and this is kind of a side that students don't necessarily get to see, but it is interesting, um, especially as we're growing and becoming our own choreographers in the dance world. Um, but what is your creative process like when you're preparing for a new piece before you even like maybe you don't even know your cast or you haven't met with them or like before you even have a set thing of music? How do you confront deciding what to do?
Yeah. I mean, like the inspiration for a piece is always interesting, right? Like how you decide even what a piece is about, whatever
Mhm.
that means, but about, and then the process of preparing for rehearsal, right? So right now with on the students, I'm doing a series of pieces. So I kind of that makes that part of it easier. Like last year or a year ago, I did the piece kind of inspired by Lake Superior,
Mm.
and then the piece we did together was inspired by the three rivers of Milwaukee.
Yeah, I can
And
definitely see that
and then
parallel.
the next piece I'm gonna do is more like using the Driftless area of Wisconsin as the starting point.
Interesting.
So and then my plan is after I have all these three pieces, I'm gonna reset it as an evening length work on like professional dancers in Milwaukee.
Wow, that's cool.
So obviously they'll change and develop
Yeah.
and be different, but using these three pieces to create like an evening length work. And maybe if you're still around, we can how to make that work. Um, but um, but when I prepare, so knowing that the three rivers were kind of something that I wanted to kind of explore, it's like there's multiple ways of doing preparation research. So some of it is like just literally doing like academic research,
Hmm.
finding articles or papers or even videos. We watched a little bit of the history of the rivers, like that one documentary video in rehearsal and finding that and just starting to try to figure out like because I didn't have besides like, oh, the three rivers of Milwaukee, like I didn't have any specific take on it. It wasn't like I was trying to like think about what I wanted to specifically accomplish, but that's where I wanted to start. So, and I mean, I think you probably maybe even felt this is like even when we started rehearsals, I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing yet. And I probably even said that pretty because I try to be transparent. Uh,
Yeah.
but you do start with some basic ideas. And like some of those things that we did even in the beginning of the rehearsal process kind of fell away. Like we didn't, they were like places to start and try and work things and like, oh, here's this, here's that. Let's think about this. Let's try this image. Let's play with it in different ways. Uh, there was the one idea where one dancer would dance down the space and you got closer and closer to them,
Yep,
uh
I remember
like the air gets short and like that was cool. Like I liked that, like it was interesting, but it didn't quite ever like find its way back
that.
after we spent
Yeah.
time
Mhm.
on it. And so there's a little bit of that. I mean, I think sometimes people think that when you make a piece you go in and like and some people are like this, they have like the formations already written, like drawn out, and they have the phrases that they teach and they go boom 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 boom, right? And in some context, you have to be like that. If you're doing like commercial dance, you don't have just endless amount of time to like waffle back and forth about what to do. Right? You've got 2-3 hours to set a dance, and you just got to do it. I mean, as luckily for me, that's not our case. That we get time to kind of be in the process of trying things out, and again, I think of it, I kind of used this term earlier as a lab. Like you're trying things. You have hypothesis and you try them out and then they work or they don't work. And then you go back and you readjust your thoughts and you try them again. And certainly over time working, things start to reveal themselves that you find engaging or interesting or like, oh, the dancers seem to be connecting to this. Let's look at it. Or I'm really curious about that image that came up, or this idea. What about this idea? And kind of when you're in that artistic process, like new things emerge that then you can incorporate. And I think where we ended up, this idea, I think the overall for me, the kind of core of that work was thinking about the rivers, thinking about how humans damage them for so long in so many different ways. And now we've been trying to heal those rivers with definitely mixed success. So that became an analogy of, can someone that has hurt you be the one that heals you?
Mm-hmm.
And like, so that idea evolves out of the process of doing more kind of like what I think of as academic research. It's not always super academic. Sometimes it's watching YouTube videos or whatever, but kind of finding more information about the thing. in this case, the rivers, finding out about the ecology of it, finding about the history of it and how it existed before like Europeans settled the area, and then what happened through that process, and then bringing those ideas in and working with you all and see how you're moving with the different ideas and kind of being inspired by that. And and then some things like we made that one movement phrase out of all those, like you all made all those movements and we put them together in a phrase with the shapes that became kind of, you did the full phrase with the other dancers doing just the shape moments in it. And that just became like a cool compositional thing that I really liked. I thought it was like really a compelling moment to see you doing the phrase, but then these shapes being echoed upstage.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that combination of content and then just like compositional things that are interesting.
Yeah.
You know.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely, from the New Dance Makers experience, I definitely can relate to that like research aspect where you don't necessarily know exactly what you're looking for at first, but things kind of like come into the picture, and sometimes maybe you create something and then you find the research later, which is kind of a fun way to do it, which probably isn't the right way all the time, but sometimes it just works out that way. So yeah, it's really interesting to me too. Thinking back, like the things that did stick and the things that didn't, from like a student perspective. A lot of times it's like, oh, like I really liked doing that, so I'm like, huh, I wonder like what didn't click necessarily. So yeah, how do you go in deciphering what does click and what doesn't click? Is it like a body language in the students or just your experience?
I would say that is definitely a more intuitive moment where it's, it's some things just have a feel that they fit, and then sometimes, and especially, the way that I work is I create lots of different like sections, almost lots of different little bits of material, and then try to like figure out how to put them together. And I don't usually think of an arc from beginning to end. I mean, at some point I do, but in the beginning, I don't have a clear arc. So I'm just like developing movement ideas, motifs, images, what have you. And then I've got to kind of piece them together in some kind of puzzle. And it's like, you think about the energy, like, oh, this one is more like calmer. This one's a little more upbeat. This one's less people. This is more people. And so you kind of want to have a feel of things changing and adjusting to one another as the piece fits. And sometimes you're just like, I just don't know where this could fit in. And sometimes it is logical. Like, again, like that aisle way, like, how do I get them into it? How do I get out of it? Like, what's the impulse? Like here we end at the end. Like I just was like, I don't know. Like, okay, let's set that aside for right now. And then it just never found a place. I never found a place for it. So I definitely feel like it's intuitive. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is like, oh, this has just a really different energy than the piece has evolved. You try something, it's there, and then, when you get to the final version, you're just like, that just doesn't fit energetically or what have you in it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely can feel that energy too from a student perspective. But talking about more of like what informs you, I was looking at your bio, and it notes that your teaching and creative work are deeply informed by your somatic practice, specifically like not frankincense, Feldenkrais. I don't know where I got that word from. Method or mindfulness, and I'm wondering, how does that somatic practice train help like shape your training, and especially like in your artistic research, like maybe it's just your own body or like what you're presenting, how does that inform?
It's an interesting question. And I mean, in terms of like my creative work, I feel like the somatic work is about, in general, like somatics in general is about kind of this first person awareness of oneself. And like, so I think some things I was interested in this, then I found somatic, which supported that interest, which now is supporting the work, is like I'm really interested in the individual performer. So it's less about everyone trying to look the same. So I'm really curious about what each person, how they take the information in and it becomes something that's alive in them, uniquely in them. And so I think somatics supports that quite a bit because again, it's about like sensing and feeling yourself and then letting that become the movement practice
Yeah.
as opposed to, you know, I mean, I do this a little bit, but like as opposed to teaching a phrase and like being really like everyone is on the same count in the same position all the time. Right? Not that never happens in my work. I mean, we had again the piece that we worked on together. There was a phrase at the end of the piece that, you know, was a unison phrase, but mostly it's like that individualness of each person is what I'm kind of most interested in. Regardless of the subject matter or the frame of the piece, it's like I want to see Megan or Anna or Corey. Like I want to see each of you as opposed to kind of this disappearing act that sometimes we're asked to do, and kind of be more neutral and just like do the, you know, just be the phrase or be the material. So, and I think again, the practice of tuning into oneself, supports that practice of seeing each person as an individual.
For sure. During like our rehearsal time, I found a lot of benefit in being able to just like close our eyes and kind of center ourselves. And I personally feel like I haven't like improved the way that I have during like our rehearsal space, just because it felt like I could just block everything out and I could feel like really embodied, even though if you weren't like telling us specifically like you were, but like you weren't in a sense where you're like you need to relax, you need to like do this specific thing. So it I definitely felt that during your process where I felt very embodied and able to do my own personal thing.
I mean, that's it's interesting because earlier you mentioned like, you know, we would often start rehearsals with just some improv practices and, you know, they weren't even say specific to that piece. They were kind of
Yeah.
more general practices and that that was to help this process forward. Like if you're not able to source the material and be present with yourself, then you can't be in the artistic practice. Right. So there it was a little bit of like training, you know, at the beginning almost to prep everyone. Just again, because we had sophomores and juniors and seniors and super senior and like, you know, all these people who had different experiences. So to try to create some commonality also.
Yeah, it was a great way to correlate to like performance too, because like the little reminder at the beginning of rehearsal would be like a great way to just start our warm up before performance, and I definitely felt that translate between each other. So yeah, I want to shift the conversation just a little bit here to talk about this very podcast. I've had like some questions where it wasn't the place to ask them, so
Sure.
great spot now.
Here we go.
So I'd like to just tap into some little things, but what initially inspired you to create the Act React podcast? And since the beginning, how has the podcast evolved? And not just in the sense of like shifting like social media platforms and things like that, but how do you evolve in choosing your guests and the kind of conversations you want to cultivate in like the changing times of the world and the dance field?
Yeah. You know, I started it quite a few years ago now, before I was even here at UWM. It kind of started, and I really wanted I really wanted to think about improvisation in a as a wider field. And I think that's happening academically. Like there's people who are thinking about improvisation across disciplines, even outside of the arts. Um, but but I wanted to just because I had been doing it so long, from my perspective, which is my lineage is really like modern through postmodern to contemporary dance with a lot of influences of somatics, right? And that's kind of the lineage that I have, and especially improv work. Done a lot of contact improvisation and all that kind of stuff. But improvisation shows up in so many other art forms, and sometimes it's acknowledged, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's called slightly something else, but it is more or less improvisation. And I was just really curious about how those different practices related to one another, right? Like how did, and for a long time I had a relationship with a musician in DC, Jonathan Morris, who is in, I'm actually for the first time going to interview him for this season. So that'll be exciting to kind of dig, since we haven't been working together for like 10 years, to kind of reimagine that. But so I had some familiarity with some music practices, in terms of improv and kind of where they might overlap, especially kind of more contemporary music. And but I really wanted to look and just talk to other people who are doing it in the field, and being able to talk to someone who does like comedy improv,
Mm.
like what do they think about, and finding like, oh, there's so many things that are similar. I mean, of course, comedy improv, they have a goal of being funny, which is not necessarily the goal that maybe I have all the time, but so many of their practices and the way they think about it is similar, let alone talking about musicians from different genres and different perspectives, and then also dancers who don't do contemporary modern postmodern stuff, talking to Aisha Upchurch, who does hip hop, or Bakari Wilder, who's a tap dancer, let alone other contemporary dancers who have lots of different perspectives as well. And it's just, what I love about it is that it just broadens my understanding of improvisation, and hopefully others, hopefully, the people that listen to this or watch these, just have a broader sense of how improvisation exists, within the arts. And I think is also something really important that I've learned is to, when I say I improvise, to make sure I contextualize what I mean by that. As I just did a moment ago, that my lineage of improv is modern, postmodern, contemporary with somatics, as opposed to just saying, I do dance improvisation. Like that's meaningless in a way. Um, and I think that's been an important kind of evolution as I've done these, to understand that,
Yeah, for sure. How do you, kind of going back to like my second question, how do you cultivate those conversations like between those two different like spaces where maybe they are more experienced in improv and maybe there aren't, where I know sometimes you've had to like really drive into those questions. How do you do that? How do you, especially during like the changing times? I know like a lot of like podcasts you spoke about like even COVID and things like that. Like how do you correspond to not only the artist but also the time that we're living in right now?
I think sometimes that's a challenge, for sure, and I feel in some ways I'm still learning how to do this, even though I've done a number of episodes now. It's like, I was never trained to be like a journalist and like how to do an interview and like all that kind of stuff. I just, again, I did like, oh, watch the YouTube videos on it or something,
Yeah.
and then try to like figure out how to do it. And um I think like I want to be like, part of me wants to really bring out or offer a space for them to share what's really important to them, and at the same time to like push a little bit to the next step. Like, often someone will say something about, oh, when you teach class, and I'm like, whoa, whoa, wait, what does that even mean for
Mhm.
you? Like, and as you probably like often I'm trying to say, can you give me a concrete example?
Yeah.
We'll talk in these, and I'll do that too. You talk in these generalities, But it's like, what I want to know, like on the ground, like, what are you doing
Mm-hmm.
in that moment of trying to offer something to the students? Because I think there's something really valuable. And I think you learn about someone's value system by how they enact this work within the classroom and within on the stage, or in performance, even if it's not on stage. And, one of the challenges is, and I felt this at times and have tried to figure out how to negotiate it because, again, the perspective I'm coming with, I have certain language and certain ideas about improvisation that may or may not be applicable to someone else's framework.
Yeah.
So my questions sometimes are not like I'm imposing a concept from like postmodern or contemporary improv onto their practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so as best I can, I try not to do that and give them space to answer it however they want. But that's definitely one of the challenges, you know. And to talk about like these changing times or the times that we're in, um, I am aware of who I'm inviting on, and I want to make sure that I hear from people who are offering different perspectives, both artistically and politically, and um, that is really important as well because often, improvisation comes out of alternative communities, alternative ways of looking at things, right? Um, you think about contact improvisation came out of the experimental dance scene who was trying to reimagine dance because they didn't feel connected to like the old modern traditions and like how do we find our voice, right? It came out of the 60s and early 70s, and that you think about hip hop came out of communities that maybe didn't have access to certain um things weren't as available,
Yeah.
right? So they were improvising, they were making something up, they were drawing on traditions that they knew, but they were improvising, and then now they were freestyling. And on that tap, the same thing. I mean, all jazz, like you think of all these practices that are deep in with improvisation, like they're pushing against something.
Mm-hmm.
It's always pushing against something. And I think by bringing some of those to the highlight, I hope to show the breadth of where improvisation can exist and does exist.
Mm-hmm. I like that. That's great. I'll just ask you one finishing question. And this one's kind of just about, again, like the way that people are kind of being raised on like short form media now. So in a time where short form media dominates, what value do you have in creating this like long living archive of deep conversations around improvisation when a lot of times people don't necessarily have that headspace to just sit and watch? Like what do you find is super beneficial about this podcast?
That is a fascinating question to think about the contrast between the two. Um, there's something about, I mean, I do think of it, it is a podcast and it is on like a YouTube channel, which some people maybe are watching us right now on YouTube and stuff like that. But I do think of it very much as an archive.
Mm-hmm.
Like these conversations are something that I think are valuable to document, these practices during this time, and that it is a source. I hope it's a source for people to think about artistic practices, improvisation, and some of these artists, some of them are quite well known and some of them are not very well known, but that they all have this value to offer. And obviously, you can't capture that value in snippets. You have to spend time with it, And so just like, I mean, thinking about our rehearsals again and thinking about the warm-ups we did, Like when we would go into a structure, an improv structure, I wouldn't have you do it for like a minute,
Yeah.
right? It would be 10 minutes or longer of being in the structure. And sometimes, you kind of like, I don't know what to do next. And then you just got to like do something. And that's where discoveries come from.
Mhm.
So having hopefully these longer conversations with people, and sometimes they meander a little bit, but then hopefully we get to something that we wouldn't get to if we just cut it off, right? Obviously, there's, the world we live in today is so dominated by short form video, and that's the way so much is kind of spread through the culture, and so there's definitely a place for that.
Mhm.
And, but I think it's whether, you're watching a TikTok video, some old guy dancing, or what have you, but it's hopefully always going to come back to something that's more substantial. That's I think that's what the practice needs to be. And again, I'm not against those forms by any means, but they can't stop there. It
Yeah.
can't only be that.
Mhm.
So maybe this offers something to some people, as they're thinking about what their practice is out in the world.
Foresee that. That's great. It's a great way to um end it off for today. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan.
Yeah, thank you. This is a fun time. This is a good experience.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Megan. It was great fun to again have the tables turn and have her ask me questions. Always, it just helps you kind of like process things. So it was really fun. As I mentioned, this is the last episode of 2025. As I'm looking forward to 2026, I want to actually extend an offer to all of you to send me suggestions. I'm looking for guests whom I may not know, or maybe I do know them, but you just think that they'd be really great guests. I'm also kind of thinking about how to play with the format of the podcast. I'm thinking maybe doing some panel discussions, maybe even some solo episodes where I just kind of ruminate on some aspects of improvisation that I've been thinking about or playing with. But regardless, I'm sure you have lots of other great ideas. So please send me any ideas or suggestions to actreact@danielburkholder.com. That's actreact without any punctuation, just the letters ACTREACT @danielburkholder.com. So in the meantime, please follow our social media. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok, and we've got Act React profile on Facebook and YouTube. We'll be dropping some video excerpts once I get through all the grading at the end of the semester, but we'll get some more video excerpts out there, and also some fun and always inspiring quotes. So stay tuned and keep an eye out for those. As we end this season of Act React, please have a wonderful end of your year, wonderful holiday season, wonderful new year. And I look forward to sharing more episodes next year. Until then, live spontaneously.